to welcome all of you to the MPOJC Urbanized Area Policy Board meeting on May 31st. And the first item agenda is calling to order. Are there any alternates?
Yeah, David Keft is here for Aaron Shane of the university, and I believe that is it.
Okay, great. Thanks. The second item is considering approval of the meeting minutes. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or changes to those minutes? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item C is the setting the next board meeting date, time, and location. Looks like July 12th is the date we're looking at.
Yeah, we're going to shoot for July 12th. Our transportation improvement program is due July 15th, and that's the last Wednesday before it's due. I had location to be determined, but I'm 95% sure it'll be in North Liberty. So I was just finishing confirming that up today, and it looks like that'll work. So you'll get the typical notice a month before with the location and time and everything, but it looks like it'll be North Liberty 4:30 on July 12th.
Great, thanks. Item 2 is public discussion of any item not on the agenda. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak to anything not on the agenda? So seeing no one, move on to administration. Consider approval regarding changes to the MPOJC Transportation Technical Advisory Committee representation. Kent.
Yeah, so good to see everybody. I appreciate everyone's time. Kent Ralston, Executive Director. So this item is just a little bit of housekeeping. Per the MPOJC bylaws, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, or the TTAC as we call it, is a permanent standing subcommittee intended to provide policy and funding recommendations to this board. The TAC is comprised of 16 voting members with 4 ex officio non-voting members. And while recommendations from the TAC are advisory, attendance at our TAC committee meetings are super important. And as most of you know, everything pretty much that this board looks at comes through our technical advisory committee. Nearly everything, as I mentioned, comes through the TAC. The board usually takes those recommendations very seriously, which is a good thing. And that committee, I can say, is very good to work with. That said, there's no current policy established for reviewing representation on the technical committee. To ensure that it's roughly proportional to the population of MPO entities. There's also nothing in the bylaws that says that even has to be the case, although it stands to the reason that the committee would be representative of the populations we serve. However, it seems to me that a review after each decennial census would be appropriate, and the MPO bylaws do state that this board needs to go through that process after every decennial census. So we already did that about a year or so ago. But I think we want to do the same thing for the TAC. And like I said, it's just a little bit of housekeeping. After a quick comparison of the 2020 census populations and current representation on the TAC, it basically just showed me that North Liberty is probably a little bit light on representation. In your memo were several options that I had put together, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but several options that I thought would at least be good for discussion. And those were shared with the TAC at their meeting last week on May 23rd. The options were intended to balance representation while also just keeping the number of total representatives relatively small. There's other MPOs around the state that have 40 or 50 people on their committees, and I don't know how they can manage that. So it seems to me that to get a quorum and to be effective, we should probably try and have it something manageable similar to this group. Again, in your memo, there was a table that laid out the current representation as well as several options. Option 1, and again, these are my options for discussion, were to mirror the composition of this board, which would be 16 voting representatives. That also just requires then 9 for a quorum. And like I mentioned earlier, the committee's very good. We usually have all but maybe 1 or 2 people show up similar to this board. So again, easy to work with, but just something to keep in mind. Option 2 was to remove 1 Coralville seat and provide 1 to North Liberty. My rationale for that is the communities are almost the exact same in terms of population now. Coralville has 3 seats and North Liberty has 1, so just to balance those out, and then again keep the total number of representatives manageable. That seemed like a fairly decent option. Option 3 was to remove 1 University of Iowa seat and provide 2 to North Liberty, again just to sort of balance things out a little bit. The university traditionally has had 2 seats, but maybe sent 1 representative to the committee meetings. And then an option 4 that I hadn't really considered but seems simple enough is just to add 2 for North Liberty, right? But that puts us up to a total of 18 voting representatives, and then increases the quorum size to 10 and starts to get a little bit harder to manage. At their May 23rd meeting, the city of North Liberty indicated a desire to simply add one new representative, which seemed very simple, and the committee agreed with that. And that is what they recommended with no other changes. So the city of North Liberty said it'd be easy enough for them to manage just sending one more additional representative, and I believe it was their engineer that they would want to send, although it's not a requirement. We just give them seats, and you could, of course, send whoever you want, whoever you like. So unless there's any questions about this, it ended up being a lot simpler than I thought it might be, which was welcomed. But unless there's any questions, I ask that you please consider approval of the recommended change to add or allow one additional seat or representative for the city of North Liberty. And in your packet, just by way of background, I did include both this board's composition as well as the technical advisory committee. Any questions?
Any questions for Ken?
Just obligatory. Can you paraphrase why Russ just wanted one more on that committee?
Yeah, I think basically he was just worried that maybe there wouldn't be the need for two. I mean, I think he had indicated maybe a year or so ago that he would like to bring the engineer on board, and
Okay.
I'm just sort of now getting to this.
Okay.
But no, I don't think he really provided much more than I think is. I indicated to the committee it was very important that folks show.
Yeah.
Attendance is important, and that was before we got into the details. But I think he just thought one additional representative would be positive for them.
Okay.
Yep. And this also doesn't mean we couldn't change this. We can discuss this at every meeting if we wanted to. It's just we haven't for probably, I don't know that we'd discussed this since I've been director. So I think we've even skipped maybe a census. So it just seemed like a good time to have this discussion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No more questions. Can I have a motion, please?
I'd move the committee's report, namely adoption of option 3 is contained in our packet.
It's not option 3.
Yeah, sorry. It would just be to add one.
Yeah, that's
additional
to
representative.
add one,
Yep.
correct?
I second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
That moves us on to transportation planning, and the first item is consider approval of draft fiscal year 2024-2027 MPOJC Transportation Improvement Program projects. Hannah, thank you.
Good evening, Danielle, Associate Transportation Planner. Like John said, this is our annual Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. The TIP covers the 4-year period of FY24 to FY27 and includes all federally funded transportation projects for road and transit, and includes state and local projects. The FY24 to 27 TIP project list is attached. Please review your respective projects in your packet. Please note for TPMS ID 54732 on that last page of the statewide transportation program handout, under the STBG section, the project sponsor is North Liberty. That's incorrect. It is actually a University Heights project. So I updated that sponsor to be University Heights, and the TPMS project ID is now changed to 54738. That there's no substantive change there. It's just that when you update a project sponsor, you have to create a new project ID. There's no content change. It's just logistics. Just as a reminder, all FY23 projects not under contract with Iowa DOT automatically carry over to FY24. To highlight a few other projects that are rolling over, the Iowa City Highway 6 Trail Project, grading and paving from Broadway Street to Fairmeadows Boulevard, is programmed in FY26, and that has about $520,000 in TAP funding. The University Heights Sunset Street Pavement Repair Project, pavement rehab and bike and ped development on Sunset Street from Melrose Avenue to South Benton, is programmed in FY25 for about $115,000 in federal money. North Liberty Rancho Way project from Hawkeye Drive south to Forever Green Road is programmed in FY26 for $2.9 million in federal money. The Coralville Highway 6 project over from just west of Lowe's to the I-80 bridge. They're doing pavement rehab. That's programmed in FY25 for roughly $865,000 in federal money. There are 3 new STBG or Surface Transportation Block Grant Program projects that have been added to this FY24 to 27 TIP. These projects were awarded by the board at your March meeting. These projects include Coralville's Dubuque Street Northeast and Forever Green Road roundabout project with $675,000 in federal funds, North Liberty's South Dubuque Street reconstruction Phase 2 project with $1.1 million in federal funds, and University Heights' Sunset Street and Melrose Avenue project with $225,000 in federal funds. All 3 of these projects are programmed in FY27. And then Iowa City's Burlington Street Highway 1 Bridge Improvement Project for $7.3 million in STBG funds also received funding, and that's programmed for FY28. This was done because there was not enough targeted funding to cover all of the projects in FY27. So the above 3 projects are in the current TIP, and then the Iowa City project will be included in the FY28 TIP. Thank you to Iowa City for moving your project to FY28. The transit portion of the TIP includes operating funds and projects from the transit program of projects. This includes mainly buses and equipment replacement, as well as funding for new transit facilities for all 3 transit agencies. Buses are usually replaced using 85% federal funding. Something to note for a few Iowa City transit items, and these have already been discussed with Darian Nagel-Gam. She's the director of transit over there, but these have already been approved by her, so this is just letting you know. Something to keep in mind as you consider your vote. Iowa City operating costs went from $1.9 million to $2.95 million in federal aid because Iowa City received $2.8 million in STBG, in 5307 funding. That's their operating funds. 10 heavy-duty replacement electric buses with charging equipment were updated to show 4 replacement buses without charging equipment, totaling $1.69 million per bus, and 6 replacement buses with charging equipment, updated at $1.1 million per bus. 10 light-duty replacement buses, you can find those on pages 8 and 9 if you're curious, are now about $181,000 per bus. And then a few highlights in the transit TIP. Iowa City has included 10 heavy-duty electric replacement buses with charging equipment, and Coralville has included 1 light-duty electric expansion bus, so that's very exciting. We're going electric. The Transportation Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the FY24-27 TIP project list with a note to change 17 light-duty buses that were inadvertently marked as diesel to be corrected to gasoline, and 1 bus was edited to include a low floor. Transit managers after the TTAC meeting made note, and so that was updated. So today we are asking for approval of the draft FY24 to 27 MPOJC TIP project list. The draft TIP will be submitted to the Iowa DOT for review by June 15th, and then MPO will begin the public input process for approval of the final TIP in July. I just threw a lot at you. Do you have any questions?
Sorry, Rod. I was just going to mention really quickly that so there's a little bit difference between the transit side of things in our TIP and then the infrastructure side. So the transit side, as Hannah was alluding to, it's essentially a wish list. So when funds become available, we can actually receive those funds and put them towards, if it's a bus or a maintenance facility or parts and equipment, that sort of thing. So to actually receive those funds, it has to be in the TIP and marked appropriately. On the infrastructure side, those funds you've already all allocated. This board has allocated just this last March, as Hannah mentioned, there were 4 new projects. But then all the additional the projects that she had mentioned previously were all also allocated by this board. So to actually spend funding on infrastructure projects, it has to be in there, and the funds are already allocated. For the transit side, it's more of a wish list. They have to be programmed, so when the money becomes available, we can accept it. Sorry, Rod.
I was just going to ask, Hannah, can you explain the difference between the number of charging stations and the number of buses? Will they just have to charge one and then move it out and move another in to charge it? Is that what we're talking about, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the reason that so Iowa City already has 4 chargers, and so they only need 6 new ones. So the thought is that with the 10 new buses, they can already use the existing 4 chargers, and then they just need 6 new ones to accommodate the other 6 buses.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. The, under Transportation, item B, consider resolution approving the MPOJC fiscal year 2024 Transportation Planning Work Program.
Yeah,
That's Ken.
thanks. So attached in your packet was a draft copy of the complete MPOJC FY24 Transportation Planning Work Program for your review. The work program includes all locally requested projects we received from all of your respective organizations, as well as general projects and procedures required by the Iowa DOT, Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Besides being a requirement, of course, we rely on our work program to help us gauge our work through the year, collect our data, and so forth. At your last meeting, you actually had the projects list provided to you, but not the actual complete document. So from your last meeting until now, we've not received any additional new project requests for FY24, so that the list has not changed. Again, just bringing the full document to you. And what the full document does is actually show you sort of what quarter by quarter we're actually going to provide our services to your organizations. We'll continue, of course, to take requests for additional projects that come up throughout the year. I mention this always, and try and get to those projects as quickly as we can. If there is a significant project, which there hasn't been in a few years, but if there was a really significant project in terms of time for our staff, we'd bring that back to this board before we would agree to take on that project. As in years past, our work program is dominated, but I would say is sort of heavy traffic engineering type work. It's corridor studies, it's speed studies, it's intersection evaluations, of course some grant writing and some assistance with the 3 transit agencies as well. At their May 23rd meeting, the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval of the document. And unless there's any questions, I'd ask that you also please consider approval of the FY24 MPOJC Transportation Planning Work Program. Happy to answer any questions that you might have, and this is due tomorrow to the feds, so hopefully they're not too substantial.
Questions for Ken? Seeing that there are no questions, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks. I would also add that we're still feverishly working on the FY23 work program, but without any unforeseen circumstances. We've just got 1 or 2 projects we're still finishing up for your organizations.
Okay, the next item is an update on the metro area bicycle and pedestrian collision data. That's Sarah.
So this is just a brief summary of where we're at with pedestrian and bicycle collisions in the metro area. Many of you have probably read or heard in the media that especially during the pandemic and in the years since that collisions and fatalities are up both for pedestrians and bicyclists. That's not quite the case in the metro area. Our collision and rates went way down during 2020 and 2021. They're both rising again, but are not back up to the numbers that they were a decade ago. I think for bicyclists, the number, the data is very good. We're trending downward. We are up somewhat since COVID, but the rate of of collisions and the severity of collisions are much lower than they've been in the past. Most of the collisions happen in, the majority happen in Iowa City, to a lesser extent in Coralville. The severity of the collisions with bicyclists are obviously more severe in higher speed areas. And so on roads that have a speed of 35 miles an hour or higher, that's where we see the fatalities. On the pedestrian side, it's more of a mixed bag. I think if you consider how much our communities have grown and the vehicle miles traveled, how much that's grown, we're still doing pretty good, but we are trending upward, and the severity of those injuries and the rate at which people are injured is increasing. So those are areas of concern. Again, most of the collisions are in the Iowa City area, to a lesser extent in Coralville and elsewhere, but again, some of the fatalities have happened outside of the Iowa City and Coralville area. So I think one of the things to reflect on is, over the last 10 years and even 20 years, the emphasis on complete streets, that the Iowa City area is one where most areas that you go to, there are sidewalks provided. With the funding that has come through the MPO, the streets that we're seeing where there's a lot of conflict between pedestrians and cars. So on our busiest streets, we're seeing really much improved crossings and alternatives to crossing the road, whether that's underpass or overpass, also the pedestrian refuge islands. Anywhere in our community where there are jobs and where there is traffic, there will be bicyclists and pedestrians. Emily and I were just doing an AM traffic count this morning out on Coral Ridge and Holiday Road, not a place that you think of as being a pedestrian area, but there were pedestrians there and there were bicyclists there at 7 in the morning. So I think overall we're doing a good job. There are obviously corridors where we could do better. Obviously where speeds are higher, when collisions do happen, they are more tragic. If I had to say that John was asking me if locations, obviously in downtown Iowa City, there are a higher number of pedestrian collisions, but the more severe collisions tend to be clustered along the Highway 1 and Highway 6 corridor, and that would be both in Coralville and in Iowa City. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And John was saying he would like to see a map, and I'm happy to provide a map if that's useful to people.
I heard you mention improved crosswalks, and I wonder what does that mean?
So just that we have the pedestrian signals at most of our crosswalks now, at most of our signalized intersections. Also, in the last few years, all of the communities have updated their pedestrian signage so that it also has the reflective strip on it. Ped refuge islands in a lot of the busier areas where people are having to cross a multi-lane road.
So one of the things we hear, and Sarah sort of reflected on this, is in the last, I would say 5 years or so, there's just been a real uptick in concerns and complaints and concerns, I guess, really just about bike and ped accommodations, about accidents that have occurred and that sort of thing. And we know you all receive those as well, and I imagine that you've also, seen that same uptick in concern. While no collision, and that's why we wanted to bring this to you, while no collision is acceptable, it is worth noting that we do really well in our urbanized area for as many bikes and pedestrians as we have. And in your packet on, I think it's figure 8, we just sort of compare ourselves to some other communities around Iowa. I also had a discussion with John about, maybe comparing ourselves to some other, maybe more light communities around the country, which we can also do. But really, for having a much higher bike and ped commuting pattern in our area, we still have a lower serious injury rate than pretty much any place in the state. So we're doing exceedingly well. But we just wanted to get this out in front of you because we know you receive those same concerns, but also to give all the communities kudos for all the things you are doing that are right. The complete streets policies, the bike and ped infrastructure, the policies, the programs, the education, and the funding that you put towards those. So we just thought this would be interesting. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on it, and we can provide some maps and more information if desired.
Yeah, the comparison to the other communities in Iowa was just Iowa City. in comparison to those. Iowa has one of the lowest, it's grouped with Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Minnesota as the lowest collision rates, the lowest fatality rates. And so we were comparing ourselves to other communities in Iowa, but we can certainly look at other places outside of those states. They may have higher collision rates just because, you know, a lot of other states, Illinois, for example, would be higher, much higher than Iowa, although it's surprisingly not. The highest are in places like Florida, Texas, places like that. One of the things that I notice traveling around is when you pull off of a highway or an interstate and you're out in an area where you have big box retail or fast food, in many communities there are no pedestrian facilities whatsoever. And in the metro area, we really don't have that. We do have some areas that are lacking pedestrian facilities, but even in the busiest areas, you will find sidewalks, you'll find pedestrian signals at the signalized crossing. So I think that does set us apart.
I'm just wondering, I know that the TAC anyway, has utilized vehicle crash data in making decisions in terms of how money gets spent here. But this is the first time I think I ever remember anybody talking about pedestrian and bike crash data. Should we be incorporating this the same way we do other vehicles?
Yeah, and we do.
We do,
So
okay.
for our train station alternative, I think the reason we don't remember is because it's been a few years since we've allocated those funds, but we do use those in our transportation alternative program funds.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't do that this year. If you all remember, a few meetings back, we discussed waiting.
Right.
Well, we have to wait on our transportation alternative program. The state isn't ready for us to release those funds yet. But we have a new pot of funds, if you recall from a few meetings back, the carbon reduction program funds that came through the new federal legislation. But we will be using bike and ped collisions to identify and provide more points to those projects that would help alleviate those issues.
And then
So that's a good question, yeah.
A follow-up question: do we have we been tracking data in terms of have the improvements worked? Is that something we can point to? I know the data is usually pretty few data points, so it might be kind of hard, but
That one gets a little tougher, and we have
Yeah.
conversations about this. I would say it's the same with vehicle infrastructure. It's hard to say that when you put in, a safety mechanism, that is directly
right.
causing or correcting a problem. But I think, and what we're trying to get, and we've done this before, this is not the first time we've looked at this data, but I would say that when you start to compare ourselves with some of these other communities across certainly the state, and we're happy to look at other parts of the country as well, I think it's hard to say that all our policies and programs and infrastructure and effort put into that by all the different communities in the county as well is not having that effect. I mean, it's almost impossible to say that it's not working. But I think just to say that there's one or two things that are working is a little bit hard. For instance, for vehicles, the 4 to 3 lane conversions that we've seen around different communities, we are doing a study in Iowa City right now to see if the 4 to 3 lane conversions have reduced collisions on First Avenue and Mormon Trek. So we've kind of got a before and after.
Okay.
The issue is just the after. We don't have a lot of years of data.
Right.
Before we have plenty, so after. So we're kind of just waiting to kind of see how that works. But we do try and do that when we can, try and make those comparisons to see if, especially when there's funding involved, that it's going to the right places.
Thank you.
And I think even with the STBG funding, which is typically used for roads, the scores are higher for those projects that incorporate improvements. And so you'll see when we do that scoring that people will, or that communities will know whether there are signalization improvements or other improvements that they're making as part of that.
I have 2 questions. The first is a follow-on to the funding. Have you analyzed the proposed debt ceiling legislation? I know a lot of the savings there are clawbacks and cancellations.
Yep. So the only clawback that we're potentially, that might potentially be a problem is our transit funding. It was the COVID funding, and I think we're going to be okay. Hannah's actually been working really hard to figure this out, but the only clawback we've heard so far, I think all of our grant funding are the STBG funds, the TAP funds, I think we're good with all that. But the clawback that we have heard about is potentially for transit. So the COVID funding that we received 3 different pools of COVID funding for transit. So that's Iowa City Transit, Coralville Transit, and CAM Bus. The COVID funding we received, which is about $17 million, was potentially in jeopardy, or is still in jeopardy, I guess I should say. However, I think Hannah's figured out that because we've actually got all those grants opened up now, so the funding's allocated, we have to go say, okay, we want the funding and open those grants. We've done that, and we think we're good. So, yeah, exactly. So I think, and I'm pretty sure we are, is what Hannah learned in the last probably 48 hours. So I think we're good to go there. Luckily, we had, because of all the community's asked us to, we went ahead and opened those grants up. It turns out that was a good idea in hindsight, so.
Thank
Just
you.
one of those things that I think it's gonna work out okay for us, but other communities may not have opened those grants up, and for no reason other than they just weren't ready to utilize the funding, and they might be in trouble. So, one of those unforeseen circumstances that you just don't have an answer to originally.
Thank you. And Sarah,
Good
the
question.
second question is about these statistics. Do these collisions just capture bicycle versus vehicle, pedestrian versus vehicle, or, for example?
It's a motor vehicle with pedestrian or with bike. Yeah, it's not it is possible that there are some in there that are like a bike and a pedestrian, but I wouldn't think that would account for many. I can think of one that I saw that was that case.
Thank you.
Just one step further, though, it would include if a bicyclist, for instance, had an accident and an ambulance was called, I believe, like if the police were called, that would be
Yeah.
included in here.
Oh, yeah.
So
Sorry, maybe I
if a pedestrian falls
misunderstood.
down and needs an ambulance, and these are generated from police reports, so if it generates a police report, then it would be included.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
exactly what I was looking
Yep.
for.
Yeah, and the majority are, tend to be non-injury related, but enough that a police officer is called.
Yep.
Sarah, have we been tracking modality, any changes in how people get around town, shifts, in other words, in what modal use?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, we rely on the U.S. Census for that, and certainly the transit numbers are down somewhat. I don't think that the bicycling is showing up. There's a high walking rate, I mean, comparatively to other communities, and transit somewhat for bicycling in terms of commuting to work. But I think it's hard to capture that because not everybody travels by the same mode all the time. Like commuting, you might be walking to work in the summer, and then in the winter you might be driving, and we don't really have a way to capture that. What we do is obviously we do trail counts, and we can show that there's a trend going upward of people using trails probably recreationally. Also, when we do our counts, when we're at intersections counting, we are counting pedestrians as well as bicyclists as they enter those intersections, but we have no way of knowing if that person is going to work or if that person is shopping or recreating. We don't know.
Okay.
And
So the census is really what we rely on.
But
And
vehicle
Sarah-
miles are up. You were saying vehicle miles are up?
Well, vehicle mile, yes, in part, but usually they're going to be simply because if your population is growing, your vehicle miles traveled are growing as well. But yes, they are up.
And Sarah can help me with this, but I think also it's unfortunate, the newer census data, I don't believe counts
didn't-
bicyclists separately.
Right, it
They
groups
used to
them.
have bicyclists, pedestrians, transit, and then it was like other, which was like taxi cab, Uber, that sort of thing. And now, for whatever reason, the census is only doing pedestrians, and then it's transit and other.
Oh,
So unfortunately now, we're gonna lose that trend line of bicyclists, at least folks that are saying they're commuting by bicycling. So that is also just an unfortunate change that's gonna make it hard to track.
yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, thanks, everybody. The next item is the update from Iowa DOT District 6 staff on major projects in the urbanized area. Kathy?
Yeah, Kathy Cutler with the Iowa DOT. We'll start first with our big project, the 8380 interchange, really making some great progress out there. We've had some small traffic shifts for southbound 380. The plan is to have all the ramps and all the lanes open, hopefully by September, if not August. So we're really ahead of schedule. Beautiful days like today really help us out there. And so they've made great progress, and they're highly incentivized to get out of there. So they want that money. Hopping over to the First Avenue Interstate 80 interchange. Currently, we're in a head-to-head configuration on the southbound lanes, working on the northbound bridge. This configuration will be for the rest of this year. They're also working on some ramp grading and some of the median piers for the new bridges. Next year, we'll switch and do basically the opposite. They'll be on the northbound lanes, working on the south bridge. Then over on Herbert Hoover Highway, again, 80 traffic is currently head-to-head on the eastbound lanes. The westbound ramps are currently closed. This configuration will likely take most or all of this construction season. We're currently grading the eastbound I-80 to West Branch as part of the future widening of I-80 in Johnson County. Hopping then up to I-380 and Penn Street interchange. The first letting is in December for the I-380 widening. We're going to be replacing the pavement on northbound I-380 and widening it to a 6-lane section. The public will likely see this as a continuation of the current construction at 8380 since it begins at Forever Green Road and goes north to Swan Lake Road. The Penn Street interchange itself is included in this overall project, but that isn't being let until next year, with the majority of the work in 2025. Outside of this area, we're actually hopping up and doing Wright Brothers Boulevard down to the Swisher interchange, again widening to 6 lanes. That letting is in August of this year, so that work is ahead of Penn Street. Just a future project to mention, replacing the US 6 bridge over the Iowa River. Kent pointed out to us, we've got that currently scheduled at the same time as the Burlington Street Bridge. Probably not a good idea to do both of those at once, so we're going to be working with our bridge office to get that timing down and not have them both under construction at the same time. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Kathy, is there an intention to make the whole of 380 there 6-lane
Yes.
at some point, and from what point to what point?
So it will be from Interstate 80 to just short of the US 30 interchange. It is basically 3 lanes all through the Cedar Rapids Metro. Yep.
Kathy, could you just confirm for me what you said about Penn Street? It'll be bid let in 2024, I think you said, and then constructed in 2025?
The letting is in December of this year.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, but construction won't be until 20,
The majority of the work is in 2025.
okay,
And that's really because we're hopping up to Wright Brothers.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then there'll be that middle piece from Swan Lake Road to Swisher, basically, and that'll be the last project you do, and that's not currently programmed. But it'll be next. It's just outside of our 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Kathy, how many of these diverging diamond interchanges is IDOT done across the state?
We have 2 currently open, one in Ankeny and one around Waukee on Interstate 80. There's a new one at Tower Terrace in I-380 in Cedar Rapids. That's going to open probably June, July of this year. Wright Brothers is a diverging diamond. Boyson Road in 380 in Cedar Rapids will be a diverging diamond, and First Avenue is a diverging diamond. So we'll have 5 in eastern Iowa.
All right,
Okay, thank
thank you. And Kent is up next with an update on the CRANDIC bus rapid transit study.
Yeah, thanks. I've mentioned that I'll just keep this on the agenda, well, until the project's done, I suppose. But just a quick verbal update. So we have, at this point, this group gave us the green light to move ahead with the bus rapid transit study on the CRANDIC line, as most of you will remember. We've since put out a request for proposals. We have interviewed and scored, as part of our process, consultants, and we're ready to actually hire one. Just yesterday, I reached out to your respective city managers and county representatives looking for funding to help cover the study. And I think once we get that ironed out, which shouldn't take more than a couple weeks, I wouldn't think, then we'll be able to move forward with the documents. So we've been preparing council documents, and because the MPO works through the purchasing department through Iowa City, just as part of our agreement, we'll be taking those, we'll eventually get that contract to the Iowa City City Council for consideration. Hopefully 2 to 3 weeks is my goal.
And then it will go to the other entities after Iowa City, or you're hoping to get it to Iowa City as the final destination?
Yeah, I think so. As long, we'll see how that works. Sometimes that gets a little bit sticky with
Okay.
how funding operates, but we'll do whatever we need to do. But the idea was to get the contract through Iowa City and have them be the contract holder. If that gets difficult for other communities, we can work different ways. But
Okay.
yep.
I can say for Iowa City, just super excited for all the communities who could be impacted to contribute to the study. Be great.
So I reached out to the same entities that helped fund the passenger rail, which was Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, the university, and the county. University Heights and Tiffin, just at the time, I mean, you're probably impacted less, and just your communities are smaller, so we didn't reach out, and I didn't do it again. I'm sure other communities would be happy if you contributed, but I did not reach out to you. So, but the other 5 entities have heard from me, and I think I've heard back from most that they'll get it on a council agenda, work session sort of thing, and move through it.
So I'm curious, from the other entities, how do you anticipate funding this? The main crux of my question is, do you anticipate using American Rescue Plan Act funds?
We don't have any left.
We do.
And
That's good.
Cupboard's bare.
That's good.
And it may help for background too. I would rather not say who the final consultant is, because we don't have the contract in place. The contract amount is $250,000, which was a little bit more than I'd hoped, but is about the same as what the passenger rail studies cost. It was phased out, but it's similar. And while I would rather not name the consultant, I can say that they've worked here locally, and we've been very impressed with them. So we were happy to hear their name thrown in the hat. So I think it'll be a good thing.
The reason that I ask about ARPA is because the county had set aside some money for rail work that could potentially roll into this. But upon discussions with staff, they indicate that there would be some additional technical requirements if we were to provide the funding through the American Rescue Plan Act. Namely, that the study would need to prioritize or at least account for how future transit planning could respond to transportation barriers for low to moderate income households or to others negatively economically impacted by the COVID pandemic. And we would have to have some sort of MOU or service contract with MPO, and there would be additional reporting and oversight requirements if we were to move ahead that way. And you think that's all?
Yeah, to me it seems. I mean, to me it seems like business as usual. I don't think that'll be an issue. And through, I think, to the mayor's question too about other communities, how our contract will work. My guess is it'll be through memorandums of understanding as well, or other, something similar. But I don't think the additional requirements will be an issue. And in fact, I think the sort of how transit would be affected with the future pandemic and that sort of thing, I would hope that that'll be a part of the study anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I shouldn't say I hope, it will be included in the study. Yeah. So I think we'll get there anyway. It may just be that we'll have to beef that section up a little bit to meet their requirements, but I don't think that'll be an issue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And to clarify,
you.
I was just asking how soon this will be on our agenda
Yeah.
at the city, so that's where that question
Yeah,
was
just
coming
as soon as we figure out where the $250,000 will come from,
Okay.
I think we're ready to. I think that the consultants are waiting to see who wins, and we're ready to award it. So
Okay.
yeah, just as quick as we can.
All right, thanks, Kent. That's good news.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
All right, item 5 is any other business?
At the TAC meeting, it's Bike Month, and you reported on the bike race, and I think we ought to report on
Yeah.
it here.
Yeah, I was going to mention it actually. Thanks for
Were
bringing it
you?
up. So back, what was it on? I have this in here, May 8th. as part of Bike Week and Bike Month, we sort of resurrected the bus, bike, car race, which I don't know that we should call it a race, but a bus, bike, car event. And the mayor was involved. V. Fixmer from the county was involved. We had a Coralville council member and a whole bunch of other bike advocates from the community. Somebody from the bike library was there. Bike Iowa City, thank you. So anyway, regardless, the idea is that there's a bus, a bike, and a car, and they race from the Coralville Library to the Iowa City Library. The idea is to show that regardless of what mode you take, there really isn't much difference in time. The mayor did win in her vehicle by 3 minutes. But admittedly, she said she got a really good parking spot. So, and we count that, yeah.
And I hit a lot of green lights.
Right. So, what time was it when we did this? It was like, it was 11 o'clock?
We started at 11.
Yeah,
And we did have our first electric bike
Right.
as part of the race.
Yep.
So you came in.
Laura, sorry.
Laura came in
Sorry, I
3
forgot
minutes
Laura,
after.
yeah.
And then V came in just a couple minutes after that, despite having her chain fall off her bike
Yeah.
and having to have a pit stop. So, and then the bus came in.
So I'm going to say, sorry, I forgot Laura was on her electric bike. So I'm going to say between everyone, and we had someone put their bike on a bus as
Yep.
well and use a rack. I would say 5 minutes difference. Is
Yeah.
that fair?
Yeah.
And if I would have had to look for parking.
Right.
There would have been, I mean, I got a spot, I
Yeah.
think the students were gone.
Right.
So
Yep.
there was plenty of parking. If
You
I
dispelled the parking myth about downtown Iowa City. Thank you.
So I'm going to say there was a 5-minute gap between everyone that participated. I appreciate everybody participating. Sarah did a nice job pulling it together. But again, there was some media involvement, and it's just a nice way to show that regardless of the mode, you can commute through, our community, the larger community, with ease, and there's really not much of a difference in the time it takes you. So, I mean, that's the whole idea behind it. And years ago we did it, and it wasn't always the vehicle that won, just to kind of prove that point a little bit further.
So how long did it take?
What were we at? Was
It's
it-
less than 15 minutes, I think.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was going to say 11, but I don't know if
Yeah.
that was true. Yeah.
The people
Somewhere in
on the
that
bus
neighborhood.
really loved, because we were following you, and they were really enjoying the race. I should say also, I know you did. I should say also that Bike Iowa City was responsible for getting us to bring this around again and do it again. And this is the end of Bike Month, but to show how much interest there is in bicycling, I would encourage you to go to Bike Iowa City's website, which is bikeiowacity.org, I believe. They have a calendar that you can go to on their site that is year-round. And in May, there is not a day of the week that doesn't have a bike event, but pretty much year-round, there are races, there are slow rides, there are gravel rides, there are
Family
mountain bike
rides,
events. I don't know that there's ever been this many people biking in Iowa City, and if you follow Bike Iowa City and the Bike Library on social media, which I highly recommend you do, you will see all of the beautiful places that they ride, both out in the county and in the different communities and the businesses that are supporting them. They've really done a magnificent job being bicycle ambassadors, and they actually have individuals that ride the bike. The fellow that rode the bike, that had his bike on the bus, is one of their bike ambassadors, and they just do a fantastic job. So
I agree. And anecdotally, to our question earlier, it's sort of about, commuting versus recreational biking. It's a little hard to kind of separate those. But anecdotally, I mean, as Sarah mentioned, if you look at the Bike Iowa City website and see all the events, and if you take part in any of those events, you'll see that recreational riding in the larger community is skyrocketing. I mean, it really is, which that's really positive. A little harder to track the commuting part of it, but it's where you have recreational riders, I think you will eventually have commuters as well, right? That's usually what it's usually not the opposite. So it's a really positive thing, and it was a great event.
Yeah, what I've learned is, I think what's coming into the conversation on biking and the culture of biking is how comfortable is the ride. And I think our trails really they're not beyond comfortable. I mean, they're really pleasurable rides and quite safe and comfortable. It's the on-street network, getting the bike to work piece. How comfortable are people riding in a more kind of pragmatic way when they're substituting biking for driving to get to destinations. I think that factoring in the comfort, I think, is important to try to understand why or why not we're seeing ridership increase. All right, looks like we're almost at the end here. Any motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second? We got a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Pauline, are you opposed? Just joking. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for your